The transmission arrived without warning, cutting through every communication channel Earth possessed. Queen Elena stood in the command center of the United Colonies headquarters, watching the alien face fill the screens. Zar'keth, supreme warlord of the Kryvax Empire, stared down at her with eyes like molten copper. Queen Elena of the humans. His voice rumbled through the translators, each word deliberate and cold. Your species has drawn our attention. We offer you a choice that no other species has received. Marry me, bind your people to the Kryvax Empire, and your colonies will be spared. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why 47 civilizations kneel before us. The transmission ended. Silence filled the command center like a held breath. How long do we have? Elena asked, her voice steady despite the ice in her veins. 72 hours, Admiral Hayes replied, his weathered face pale. Their fleet is already positioning around our outer colonies. 300 warships, maybe more. Our intelligence suggests they could sterilize a planet in under an hour. Elena turned to her council. 12 faces, 12 of the brightest minds humanity had produced, and she saw the same desperate calculation in each pair of eyes. General Okonkwo spoke first, his deep voice strained. We have 140 ships capable of engaging at that level, even if we recalled every vessel, grouped our entire fleet. The mathematical projections give us a 4% chance of surviving the first engagement. 4% isn't zero, Commander Reeves said, but her words lacked conviction. 4% is a massacre, Elena replied. She looked at the now dark screens where Zar'keth's face had been. Show me everything we know about the Kryvax Empire. For the next 6 hours, Elena absorbed information like a woman drowning. The Kryvax had conquered methodically. Over 3 centuries, 47 species, each one either annihilated or absorbed. The pattern was always the same. Overwhelming force, total subjugation, no mercy for resistance. But one detail caught her attention. These species that survived, the ones listed as incorporated. Elena pointed at the data streaming across her tablet. What happened to their leaders? Dr. Amara Chen, the chief xenoanthropologist, pulled up additional files. Symbolic marriages, or binding ceremonies. The Kryvax seem to have a cultural obsession with dominance hierarchies. By marrying or ceremonially binding the leaders of conquered species, they create a psychological framework of submission. Are these leaders still alive? Most of them, yes. They're kept in positions of limited authority, managing their own people under Kryvax oversight. It's actually efficient from an imperial standpoint. The conquered populations see their own leaders enforcing Kryvax rule, which reduces active resistance. Elena felt something click into place in her mind. A dangerous idea, the kind that could either save humanity or doom it faster than any battle. I need complete dossiers on every one of those leaders. Everything we can gather in the next 60 hours, and I need it done quietly. Admiral Hayes frowned. Your Majesty, you're not actually considering... I'm considering survival, Admiral. And sometimes survival requires sacrifices that look like surrender. She met his eyes. But I didn't become queen by accepting other people's definitions of defeat. The next 2 days blurred together in a storm of preparation and secret planning. Publicly, Elena's council debated military options, ran simulations, and made shows of defensive preparations. Privately, Elena worked with a team of 3. Chen, a communications specialist named Lieutenant Drake, and a former intelligence operative named Victor who officially didn't exist in any government database. They built a network, reaching out through abandoned relay stations and dead-drop protocols that the Kryvax wouldn't think to monitor. Elena's message was simple, coded in mathematical sequences that any advanced civilization would recognize as artificial. The human queen seeks words with those who wear crowns in cages. Responses came slowly, carefully. First from the Thrall Matriarch, then the Velkin Prime, then others. 12 voices in total. Each one representing a species bound to the Kryvax Empire. Each one trapped in the same cage Elena was about to enter. When the 72 hours expired, Elena stood before the cameras and accepted Zar'keth's proposal. The words tasted like ash, but she delivered them with the poise of someone who had ruled Earth's united colonies for 8 years. I accept your offer of marriage, Warlord Zar'keth. in the interest of peace between our peoples. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks later on the Kryvax throne world of Karvoth. 3 weeks for Elena to either build a miracle or watch her gamble collapse into ruin. The Kryvax sent a ceremonial escort fleet to Earth, massive warships gleaming with aggressive architecture that made human vessels look like toys. Elena boarded the flagship with a delegation of 20, each one carefully selected. To the Kryvax, they were attendants and advisors. In truth, they were intelligence gatherers, communications experts, and 2 operatives who could kill in 17 different ways without making a sound. The journey to Karvoth took 9 days. Elena spent every moment learning, watching, and planning. The Kryvax crew treated her with formal respect tinged with contempt. She was a prize, a symbol of human submission, nothing more. They never suspected the woman who smiled politely and asked curious questions about Kryvax culture was memorizing security protocols, guard rotations, and communication frequencies. On the 6th day, Lieutenant Drake found her in her assigned quarters. "Your Majesty, we've established secure lines to all 12 resistance contacts. The Thrall Matriarch wants to meet during the reception festivities. Can we trust the security?" The Kryvax use a rotating encryption system, but it's built on the assumption that conquered species lack the mathematical sophistication to crack it. They haven't updated their protocols in 40 years. Arrogance makes people sloppy. Elena smiled grimly. Then let's use their arrogance against them. Karvoth was a fortress world, its cities built from dark metal and sharp angles that spoke of a culture built on warfare and dominance. The throne palace rose from the capital like a blade, kilometers tall and bristling with weapons emplacements. As Elena's shuttle descended, she saw ships from dozens of species docked in designated zones, the fleet of an empire, built on subjugation. Zar'keth met her in the Grand Hall, surrounded by hundreds of Kryvax nobles and military commanders. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his armored form radiating controlled power. When he took her hand in his own, she felt the strength that could crush bone with casual effort. "Queen Elena," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "you have made a wise choice. Your species will prosper under our protection." "I seek only the safety of my people," Elena replied, the words carefully neutral. She had practiced this role, the compliant bride who understood her place. It made her skin crawl. But survival required sacrifice. The ceremony itself was a spectacle of Kryvax dominance. Elena wore ceremonial robes that mixed human and Kryvax designs, a visual symbol of Earth's absorption into the Empire. She spoke the vows in the Kryvax tongue, words that bound her people to the Empire's will. Every moment was broadcast across all Kryvax territories, a message to 47 conquered species. Resistance is futile. Even the humans have bowed. But during the reception that followed, while Kryvax nobles congratulated Zar'keth on his newest acquisition, Elena moved through the crowd with purpose. The other consorts and bound leaders were easy to identify. They wore similar ceremonial garments, their expressions carefully neutral masks over whatever emotions churned beneath. The Thrall Matriarch was a being of flowing, crystalline structures, her species adapted to high-gravity worlds. She approached Elena near observation platform overlooking the city. "You asked for words, human queen." The Matriarch's translator rendered her harmonic speech into flat English. "Words are all we have left. The Kryvax take everything else." "How many of your people survive?" Elena asked quietly. 3 billion on our home world. Another billion scattered across labor colonies. We were 8 billion before we refused the Kryvax demand for resources. The Matriarch's crystalline form seemed to dim. "They destroyed our 2 largest cities in 3 minutes. We surrendered within the hour." Elena felt rage bloom in her chest, but kept her expression serene. "And the others? The Velkin, the Dross Collective, the Minari Concordance? Similar stories. Some fought longer. All lost everything when they did. The Kryvax are efficient in their cruelty, human queen. They break spirits, not just bodies." "Broken spirits can heal," Elena said, "given the right circumstances." The Matriarch turned, her multifaceted sensory organs focusing entirely on Elena. "What are you suggesting?" If 12 conquered species coordinated their resistance, struck simultaneously at Kryvax supply lines, communication hubs, and garrison forces, what would happen? We would die. The Kryvax would annihilate us world by world, unless, Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper, there was no Kryvax fleet left to respond. Unless their warships were suddenly dealing with threats across all their territories at once. Unless someone fed resistance forces detailed intelligence on Kryvax military deployments, shield frequencies, and command protocols. The matriarch was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her harmonic voice carried a note that the translator rendered as hope. You would need access to the Imperial military network, the kind of access only someone in the royal household could achieve. Hypothetically, Elena said with a slight smile. Over the next 4 days, Elena met quietly with representatives from all 12 subjugated species. Each conversation was brief, hidden in plain sight among the wedding festivities. The Velkin spoke of their resistance cells, scattered but organized. The Dross Collective had ships, old and outdated but functional. The Minari had weapons stockpiles hidden from Kryvax inspections. Each species brought something to the table. Elena brought intelligence. As Zar'keth's new bride, she had been granted quarters in the palace complex with access to information networks that the Kryvax never imagined she could understand. But humanity had spent centuries developing computer systems, encryption, and information warfare. The Kryvax databases were sophisticated but built on principles that human mathematicians had surpassed decades ago. Lieutenant Drake and Victor worked 18-hour days, routing information through channels so complex that the Kryvax monitoring systems registered nothing but routine data transfers. They mapped the Kryvax fleet deployment across 47 worlds. They found the weaknesses in garrison forces spread too thin across an empire too large. They discovered that the Kryvax had 300 warships within rapid response range of Karvoth, but only 70 ships covering each of their major conquered territories. The plan came together like a puzzle made of razors. 12 species, each one targeting Kryvax forces in their own systems simultaneously. Human forces, which had quietly mobilized under the guise of defensive exercises, would strike the throne world's orbital defenses. The goal wasn't total victory, it was chaos. Create enough simultaneous crises that the Kryvax couldn't respond to all of them. Make the Empire choose which territories to protect and which to lose. But 2 weeks into her marriage, disaster struck. A Velkin resistance member named Krell was captured trying to smuggle weapons into a Kryvax munitions facility. Under interrogation, he revealed Elena's name. The message reached Elena through Drake's network just hours before it reached Kryvax intelligence. Elena found herself in her quarters with Victor when Drake burst through the door, his face ashen. They're coming. Krell broke. We have maybe 20 minutes before the palace guards connect the dots. Her mind raced through options, each one narrower than the last. Can we move up the timeline? Not without coordination. We need at least 48 hours to get everyone in position. If we trigger now, half the resistance cells won't be ready. We'll lose. Elena felt the weight of leadership, the terrible mathematics of sacrifice. Get me a secure line to the Velkin Prime. Now. 5 minutes later, she was speaking with Prime Sector, the Velkin leader who had become one of her closest allies in this desperate alliance. Krell was one of ours, Sector said, his translated voice heavy with grief. I take responsibility. I need you to do something harder than taking responsibility, Elena replied. I need you to let me sacrifice someone. One of my people. Someone who will confess to coordination efforts but keep the full network hidden. Someone whose death will satisfy Kryvax justice enough to stop them from digging deeper. The silence stretched for 5 heartbeats. You're talking about a volunteer execution. I'm talking about buying time for 3 billion Thrall, 6 billion Velkin, and every other conquered species in this empire. Someone dies today or everyone dies in 2 weeks when this plan falls apart. Victor stepped forward. I'll do it. Elena turned to him, this man who had spent 20 years in the shadows protecting humanity. Victor, Your Majesty, I'm 63 years old, no family. My entire life has been about protecting people I'll never meet. Let me do it one more time. He smiled, and it was genuine. Besides, I've always wondered if I could lie convincingly to telepathic interrogators. Seems like a fitting final challenge. 20 minutes later, when Kryvax security forces stormed Elena's quarters, they found Victor frantically deleting files from a personal console. His story was simple. He had coordinated with Krell to gather intelligence on behalf of human military forces, acting without Elena's knowledge. The human queen was a victim of her own advisor's treachery. Elena played her role perfectly, the shocked and betrayed bride who had trusted the wrong person. She demanded Victor be punished according to Kryvax law. The guards took him away, and she never saw him again. That night, Zar'keth came to her chambers. His massive form filled the doorway, his copper eyes studying her with predatory intelligence. Your advisor was executed this evening. His interrogation revealed interesting information about human intelligence gathering capabilities. Elena met his gaze, letting calculated fear show in her expression. I trusted him. He betrayed that trust and endangered my people's safety. I hope his punishment was appropriate. He died bravely, I'll grant him that. Refused to implicate you, even under neural extraction. Zar'keth moved closer, his presence overwhelming. But I wonder, human queen, about your calm acceptance of this marriage, about your perfect compliance and polite questions. You smile when you should rage. You ask about our culture when you should mourn your lost sovereignty. Elena's heart hammered, but she kept her breathing steady. Would rage change anything? Would mourning free my people? I am a queen, warlord. I do what I must to protect those I rule. If that means accepting reality, then I accept it. Zar'keth studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Perhaps you are simply wiser than those who came before you. The Thrall matriarch still weeps for her lost cities. The Vulcan Prime radiates hatred in every interaction. But you, human queen, you have already adapted to your new role. Good. It will make the transition easier for your species. After he left, Elena allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of shaking grief for Victor. Then she opened an encrypted channel to Drake. We move in 48 hours. Send the signal to everyone. Victor bought us our time. We can't waste it. The next 2 days were agony stretched into an eternity. Elena maintained her role, attending state functions and smiling at Kryvax nobles who discussed the new human territories like property to be divided. She met with the other bound leaders, each conversation now carrying desperate urgency. The Thrall matriarch would trigger uprisings across 3 Thrall colony worlds. The Vulcan Prime had resistance cells ready to sabotage Kryvax supply depots and communication arrays. Each of the 12 species had their targets, their moment to strike back against the empire that had broken them. And humanity would lead the assault on Karvoth itself. Admiral Hayes had positioned the human fleet in what appeared to be a defensive formation around Earth's outer colonies, but over 3 weeks they had quietly repositioned, using the Kryvax's own arrogance against them. The Empire's monitoring of human forces had grown lax once Elena accepted the marriage. Why watch a species that had already submitted? On the morning of the 48th hour, Elena attended a breakfast ceremony with Zar'keth and his high command. 30 Kryvax generals and admirals, discussing the logistics of integrating human industrial capacity into the Empire's war machine. They talked about her people like resources to be exploited, and she listened with a pleasant expression that hid the countdown running in her mind. At precisely 0900 hours Karvoth time, which had been synchronized across all resistance cells, everything happened at once. 12 species erupted in coordinated rebellion. Thrall workers on mining colonies seized Kryvax weapons and turned them on their overseers. Vulcan resistance fighters bombed garrison headquarters. The Dross Collective's hidden ships launched from asteroid bases and engaged Kryvax patrol vessels. The Minari Concordance triggered electromagnetic pulses that disabled communication networks across 5 systems. And above Karvoth, 300 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light transit, their weapons hot and targeting solutions locked. Alarms screamed through the palace. Zar'keth surged to his feet, roaring orders in the Kryvax tongue. His generals scrambled to respond, but the reports flooding in were impossible to process. Rebellions on 40 systems, fleet engagements at 12 major territories, and now humanity's entire military force hammering at the throne world's orbital defenses. Zar'keth turned to Elena, understanding and rage warring in his copper eyes. You. Elena stood, and for the first time since accepting his proposal, she let her true feelings show. Me. Did you really think humanity would bow to you? That I would accept chains for my people and call it peace? You were compliant. Obedient. I watched you. You watched me play a role, warlord. I learned it from every species you've conquered. Smile and submit while you plan and prepare. You taught us well through the examples of those who came before. Zar'keth reached for her, but Elena had already triggered the device Drake had built into her ceremonial bracelet. A pulse of energy erupted outward, disrupting the palace's internal security systems and creating a brief window of chaos. Elena ran. The palace had been mapped by her team over 3 weeks. She knew the routes to the communications center, the paths that avoided heavy guard concentrations. Behind her, she heard Zar'keth's roar of fury and the thunder of armored feet. She reached the central communication hub and found Drake already there, having fought his way through 3 guards. He was bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, but still working frantically at the controls. "I'm opening channels to every conquered species," he said through gritted teeth, broadcasting on all Kryvax frequencies. Elena took position at the main console, activating the systems that would carry her voice across the Empire. Above them, she could hear the palace shaking as human weapons pounded Karvoth's defenses. The orbital batteries were returning fire, but they had been positioned to repel external attacks, not an assault fleet that had appeared at point-blank range. "People of the Kryvax Empire," Elena spoke, her voice broadcasting to billions across 47 worlds. "For too long you have lived under the boot of conquest. You have been told that resistance is futile, that the Kryvax are unstoppable. Today we prove that lie wrong. 12 species, fighting together, united not by submission but by choice. The Kryvax built their empire on fear and isolation. We are building something stronger, an alliance of the free." The door exploded inward. Kryvax guards poured through, weapons raised. Drake died, buying Elena precious seconds, throwing himself at the first soldier through the door. Elena kept speaking, even as energy rounds tore through the equipment around her. "Rise up. Fight back. You are not alone." "Not anymore." Zar'keth himself tore through the guards, his fury beyond words. He grabbed Elena, his massive hand closing around her throat. "You've destroyed everything. Rebellions I can crush, but you've given them hope. You've shown them cooperation. That poison will spread." "That's the point," Elena choked out. "You can kill me. You can even crush these rebellions eventually. But you can't unkill the idea. 47 species now know they can work together. That's a genie you can't put back in the bottle." Above them, the palace shuddered as human kinetic weapons breached the planetary shields. Admiral Hayes was following the plan, targeting the throne palace itself. Zar'keth looked up, understanding the mathematics of his position. His fleet was scattered across the Empire, responding to dozens of simultaneous crises. The forces at Karvoth were formidable, but not infinite, and humanity had brought everything they had. "You're willing to die here?" Zar'keth demanded. "If it means my people stay free?" "Without question." Elena met his eyes. "That's what you never understood about humanity. We're terrifyingly good at accepting terrible costs for the things we believe in. You thought you could break us with threats, but threats only work on people who value survival above everything else." For the first time, Elena saw something like uncertainty in the Kryvax warlord's expression. Then the palace wall exploded inward as a human boarding craft punched through, and everything became chaos and fire. The battle for Karvoth lasted 18 hours. The Kryvax fought with the desperation of an empire watching its foundations crack, but the human fleet had surprise, determination, and detailed intelligence on every weakness in the throne world's defenses. More importantly, they had allies. Thrall ships, old and battered but crewed by warriors who had waited years for this moment, joined the fight. Velkan raiders hit Kryvax supply lines, cutting off reinforcements. The Dross Collective's electronic warfare specialist jammed enemy communications, creating chaos in the Kryvax command structure. And on Karvoth itself, the other bound leaders led their guards in rebellion, turning the palace into a war zone. When the firing finally stopped, Zar'keth was dead, killed by the Thrall matriarch in personal combat. The Kryvax High Command had been shattered. Their throne world was under occupation by a coalition fleet, and across the Empire, rebellions had succeeded on 32 of the 47 conquered worlds. Elena stood in the ruins of the throne palace, her ceremonial wedding robes torn and scorched, watching the sun rise over a city that had symbolized dominion for 300 years. Thrall matriarch approached, her crystalline form reflecting the dawn light. "What happens now, human queen?" Elena looked at the assembled leaders of 12 species, each one representing billions of souls who had lived under Kryvax rule. "Now we build something better, not an empire. Not domination, an actual alliance. Free species choosing to work together. The Kryvax will not accept this," Prime Sector said. "Their remaining forces will regroup. This war has only begun." "Then we fight it together," Elena replied. That's what they never expected. They conquered species one at a time, isolating each victim. But we're not victims anymore. We're allies. And that makes us stronger than any empire built on fear. In the months that followed, the alliance solidified. Some Kryvax territories sued for peace, their commanders pragmatic enough to recognize that the empire was finished. Others fought on, forcing brutal campaigns that tested the coalition's resolve, but the alliance held. The human queen who had accepted a forced marriage became the architect of the Free Coalition, a union of species bound not by conquest but by mutual choice. The wedding that was meant to symbolize humanity's submission instead became the catalyst for the empire's fall. Years later, when historians tried to understand how an empire that had ruled for 3 centuries could collapse so quickly, they pointed to that moment when Elena spoke across all frequencies, showing conquered species that they could fight together. They called it the turning point, the speech that changed everything. But Elena knew the truth was simpler and more fundamental. The Kryvax had built their empire on a foundation of isolation and fear. She had simply reminded everyone that there was another way. The chains could become bridges if you were brave enough to reach across the divide. The forced marriage that should have ended in humanity's subjugation instead ended in empire and birthed an alliance that would reshape the galaxy. Because sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is not refusing to kneel, but kneeling with a plan to rise stronger than before. And humanity, as the Kryvax learned too late, had always been terrifyingly good at turning defeat into victory, submission into strategy, and chains into weapons of revolution.